2. Slacks for Ella Funt. The day Ramona's father went to work at the checkout counter of the ShopRite market, life in the Quimby household changed. Sometimes Mr. Quimby worked all day. Sometimes he worked afternoons and evenings. Sometimes he took the car to work while Mrs. Quimby took the bus to her job in Dr. Hobson's office. Sometimes she drove the car while he took the bus, or one would drop the other off at work. Life was different for Ramona, too. She now went home with Howie Kemp after school. The Quimbys paid Howie's grandmother to look after Ramona until one of her parents could come for her after work. Mrs. Quimby said she could not hold a job unless she knew where Ramona was. Every single minute. Beezus also went to the Kemp's house after school, unless she telephoned her mother for permission to go to a friend's house. Ramona had no choice. One rainy Saturday morning, when Mr. Quimby had worked at the market for several weeks, Ramona asked her mother, "Where do you have to go today?" Mr. Quimby always worked Saturday, the busiest day at the market, which meant Mrs. Quimby had the use of the car to run errands. Ramona was concerned about her mother's errands because she always had to go with her, or, as she thought of it, be dragged along. Most of them were of no interest to her. Mrs. Quimby thought a moment before she said in surprise, "Well, what do you know? No place. We have groceries in the cupboard. No one needs to go shopping for shoes. No one needs a present to take to a birthday party. I can stay home." "Well, then what are you going to do?" asked Ramona. She hoped her mother would not decide to clean house. "So," answered Mrs. Quimby, "I've been trying to finish a blouse for weeks." Sewing seemed like a cozy way to spend a rainy morning. Ramona watched her mother get out the portable sewing machine and set it on the dining room table, along with a pattern and bundle of fabric. "I'm going to wash my hair," announced Beezus. "Again?" inquired Mrs. Quimby. "You washed it only day before yesterday." "But it's so oily," complained Beezus. "Don't worry, it's just your age," reassured Mrs. Quimby. "You'll outgrow it." "Yes," said Beezus gloomily, "in about 1,000,000 years, when I'm too old to care." "You'll never be that old," said Mrs. Quimby. "I promise." Ramona, bored with her sister's daily complaints about oily hair, leaned on the dining room table to watch her mother. "I like it when you stay home," she remarked, thinking of the days before her mother had gone to work, when the house had smelled of baking cookies or homemade bread on Saturday morning. "Can I sew too?" she asked, picturing a companionable morning close to her mother. She imagined a neighbor dropping in and saying, "Ramona is her mother's girl," as the two of them stitched away together. "Yes," her mother would answer, "I can't get along without Ramona." "Of course you may sew. You know where the scrap bag is," answered her mother with a smile. "What would you like to make?" "I have to think," Ramona said. She went to her room and in a moment returned with a tired-looking stuffed elephant and a large piece of red and white check cloth left over from a dress her mother had made for her when she was in kindergarten. Ramona had liked that dress because it matched the red plastic hat the fireman gave her when the kindergarten class visited the fire department. Mrs. Quimby looked up from the sewing machine. "I haven't seen Ella Funt for a long time," she remarked, as Ramona stood the elephant on its 4 feet on the table. "I'm going to make her some slacks," said Ramona as she spread out the fabric. "All my other animals have clothes, except that snake." Mrs. Quimby considered. "Slacks for an elephant won't be easy. Why not make slacks for Chevrolet?" "She's too beat up," said Ramona critically. "If I were you, I would—" began Mrs. Quimby as Ramona studied the check cloth. "I can do it," interrupted Ramona, who was impatient with instructions. Mrs. Quimby said no more. The sewing machine began to hum. Ramona picked up her mother's pinking shears and began to cut. There was something satisfying about using pinking shears and watching fabric part in such a neat, zigzag line. Working quietly at the table with her mother was even more satisfying. Even the grouchy old cat, Picky, sitting on a corner of the dining room carpet washing his paws, was behaving like a satisfactory pet. This morning was a time for sharing confidences. "Mother, did I used to be like Willa Jean?" Ramona asked the question that had worried her since the brunch. Mrs. Quimby answered when she came to the end of her seam, "You were a lively little girl with a lot of imagination, and you still are." Ramona was reassured by her mother's words. "I would never throw Kleenex all over the living room when someone had a party," she said virtuously. If only every Saturday could be like this one, no errands to run, and the two of them sewing and talking together. "Are you going to stop working now that Daddy has a job?" Ramona asked as Beezus, her hair wet but combed, came into the dining room with a paper bag in her hand. Mrs. Quimby looked up from the collar she was pinning to her blouse. "Why, no," she answered as if she were surprised by the question. "Why not?" demanded Ramona as Beezus pulled some sewing out of the bag. "Because we got behind on our bills when Daddy was out of work," explained Mrs. Quimby. "And because we have plenty of ways to use money. Beezus will be ready for college in 5 years, and in a few more years you will be ready too." College, to Ramona, was a faraway school for young grown-ups. When they went to college, their mothers worried about them and mailed them boxes of cookies that they called care packages. She had learned this from listening to some of the neighbors talk to her mother. Ramona was surprised to learn that she and her sister would be expected to go to such a school some day. "Besides," continued Mrs. Quimby, "I like my job. The people are interesting, and Dr. Hobson is pleasant to work for." "I wish Daddy liked his job." Beezus's head was bent over the skirt she was basting together. Ramona understood what Beezus meant, because she felt sad too, and her stomach felt tight when her father came home tired and discouraged after a day in the checkout line. People were in a hurry, many were cross because the line was long, and some customers acted as if he were to blame because prices were so high. "So do I wish he liked his job." There was a hint of sadness in Mrs. Quimby's voice. "But maybe when he's worked at ShopRite longer, he will like it better. New jobs take getting used to." Ramona held up the 2 pieces of cloth she had cut out for the front and back of the slacks. Both were the same. Until now she had fastened together whatever she was making with Scotch tape or a stapler. Now Ramona felt the time had come for her to advance. Beezus had been using the sewing machine for several years. "Can I sew on the machine?" she asked. "If you're careful." Mrs. Quimby demonstrated the use of the machine. Even though Ramona had to stand up to stitch, she found the machine easier to use than she had expected. She followed her mother's instructions carefully and watched the needle move up and down, leaving behind a trail of tiny, even stitches. Ramona was filled with pleasure at the sight. The sewing machine was much more satisfactory than the stapler, which often stuck or ran out of staples. All sorts of uses for the sewing machine began to fly through Ramona's imagination. Maybe she could even sew paper and make a book. Quickly, but still carefully, she finished the seams of Elephant's slacks. "See? I can use the sewing machine, too," Ramona bragged to Beezus. Beezus did not bother to answer. She was busy pulling on her skirt while Mrs. Quimby stood by to see how it fit. Ramona picked up her gray flannel elephant and shoved its hind legs into the legs of the slacks. Mrs. Quimby pinned the waistband for Beezus and stood back to look at the skirt. "It fits nicely," she said. "You can go ahead and stitch it." Pleased, Beezus went off to the bedroom to admire her work in the mirror. Ramona tugged and tugged at Elephant's slacks, but no matter how hard she tugged, she could not make them come up to the elephant's waist, or to what she guessed was the elephant's waist. Elephant's bottom was too big, or the slacks were too small. At the same time, the front of the slacks seemed way too big. They bunched under Elephant's paunch. Ramona scowled.